Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us to discuss the role of housing supports in reentry. This work is supported by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The Bureau of Justice Assistance is a component of the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs. This is part of the Reentry Week series. Today we're discussing housing and behavioral health issues. During Reentry Week, the National Reentry Resource Center will be your one-stop shop for resources and virtual events. You can also follow this through the hashtags Reentry Matters, Reentry Week, and Reentry Week 21 to find more information through social media platforms. We have an awesome group today to tell you a little bit more about how housing fits into reentry processes. First, we have Amanda Clark, who's the housing coordinator and team lead for the Council for the Homeless Housing Solutions Center in Vancouver, Washington. We also have Deputy Jay Costello, who oversees reentry at Clark County Sheriff's Office in Washington. We have Charles Francis, who's a project manager for behavioral health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and Anna Lookingbill, who's the jail discharge planner for the reentry program in Clark County Sheriff's Office in Washington. I am Sarah Wurzberg. I'm a program director for behavioral health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The Council of State Governments is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We work to develop research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. We are lucky enough to be able to support Second Chance Act grant programs on topics related to behavioral health, housing, and family supports. Today, we're going to give a broader overview on the role of housing supports in reentry. Then we'll hear from one of the current Second Chance Act grantees, fiscal year 18 Second Chance Act reentry program for adults with co-occurring substance use and mental disorders from Clark County, Washington. They'll have partners from the Sheriff's Office as well as their Council for Homeless also speaking today. So we're really excited to have that information to share with you. First, we're going to begin with the overview of the role of housing supports in reentry, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Charles Francis, to speak to that. Take it away, Charlie.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and great to talk to you all today. So, as you all know, housing, affordable housing in particular, is hard to come by for many populations and in most communities across the United States. But people exiting the justice system have a particularly difficult time, and too many are ending up exiting directly into homelessness. Before COVID-19 hit, over 50,000 people a year were entering emergency shelters from either prison or jail each year. And that is while the number of people experiencing homelessness has fallen, the number of people entering homelessness from corrections institutions has gone up. So there's a real mismatch there. And interestingly, many folks are getting released into community supervision as well too. So that definitely adds an extra layer into these different issues. And the reason for this is housing instability and homelessness and involvement with the justice system can often be a vicious cycle. And there's several reasons for this. Law enforcement policies and procedures like ordinances against panhandling, sleeping in the street can contribute to arrest for behaviors that are associated with basically living your private life outside. And the next point in this cycle, lack of stable housing can sometimes make you less likely to be diverted from jail or prison. Further compounding things, when you come out of jail or prison, criminal history can be a barrier to securing housing, and I'll go a little bit deeper into that in a second. And finally, lack of housing after exit can increase the chances of community supervision violations and ultimately going back to prison or jail. So some of these barriers to accessing housing upon reentry are at the state and local level in particular, but as well as the federal. We have what are called collateral consequences, particularly state laws and regulations that restrict access to housing. Probably the best known of these are sex offender residency restrictions, but there are many others. Public housing authorities have wide latitude in terms of criminal history look back periods, how many years ago that you committed a certain either type of offense or any offense that renders you ineligible for housing. And these may be above sort of the minimum that HUD requires. And also in private market housing, many people coming back from prison and jail face a lot of stigma or other resource challenges just being able to find and obtain this housing in the first place. But housing is absolutely critical to successful reentry. When you don't have to live your private life outside, you're much less likely to be in contact with law enforcement. When you have stable housing, you're much less likely to return to jail or prison due to the stability that you have and the platform you have for pursuing other goals in your life. You have a more general feeling of community stability, and you're able to participate more in community-based services, which could be treatment, employment, or many other of these type of services. And so, in particular, a very promising and evidence-based model towards connecting people with permanent housing is called Housing First. And the core philosophy here is to provide housing without any preconditions, in particular, sobriety or engagement in treatment, but this can also include criminal records or credit checks or things of that nature. The idea is that housing is actually a foundation to be able to work on these larger goals. And so there are a number of good studies out there showing that housing first type models lead to people staying in housing longer, engaging in treatment and services to help their recovery, and ultimately reduce returns to prison and jail. Now, housing first is not the only approach out there. Short-term emergency housing is very important. Recovery housing is important for people who want to engage in treatment or may have mandated conditions of release. But housing first really complements these approaches as a way to get people housed permanently. And finally, it makes economic sense. There is good data out there also showing that getting people into housing first type programs reduces costs associated with homelessness, such as jail stays and emergency room stays. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit about when you're connecting people with housing, there are many different types of housing to choose from. When we talk about affordable housing in general, that is any type of housing where the resident's rent is usually set at about 30% of income, either because the housing is subsidized or the rent is restricted. And that encompasses several different types of housing, which can generally be broken down into tenant-based rental assistance, otherwise known as Section 8 vouchers, the most common kind, as well as public housing developments and privately owned subsidized housing developments. The target population for general affordable housing is people who can't afford housing on the private market on their own, but may not have a large need for supportive services. And affordable housing is usually mentioned in contrast with market rate housing, which represents most of the inventory in a given community, and there are no rent subsidies or restrictions. Now, there are other types of housing that have supportive services attached, and this typically is the type of housing that utilizes a housing first approach. A very important type of housing in reentry is permanent supportive housing. It's affordable housing, but there are no time limits, and it also provides wraparound supportive services for the people that are living there. And the target population for PSH are people that have high housing affordability needs, but also complex behavioral health, healthcare needs, or at higher risk of reoffense. And it's good to target PSH towards these higher acuity folks because it tends to be in more limited supply and it's very expensive and resource intensive. Rapid rehousing is the other major housing model under the housing first / supportive housing umbrella. And it can be many different things. It's an individualized package of assistance to connect people to a housing and to keep them there. And this assistance can include help with security deposits, utility arrearages, a few months of rental assistance, housing stabilization. It really is the key aspect of rapid rehousing is it's based on the person. And so the target population is different than people with PSH. People in rapid rehousing may need supportive services for a short period of time to find and stay in housing. But the idea is that they will be able to be self-sufficient after a certain period of time in most cases. So those are some of the key housing system types. I also want to talk about some of the key partners in your local housing system. Probably the one that you should know first is the continuum of care. It's a planning body in a community, it may be at a city, regional, county, or state level, that governs the access to all of the homeless assistance funded by HUD in a community. And in particular, these are the housing first type programs, permanent supportive housing, and rapid rehousing. They help make funding decisions, and they also have what's called a coordinated entry system, where people can go to different intake points throughout the community, including homeless shelters, social service providers, and sometimes prisons and jails, to go into the system and then be prioritized for available housing based on their needs. Another very important housing partner is a public housing authority. It can be a municipal or regional agency that administers Section 8 vouchers and subsidized developments, including public housing developments. Now, landlords are an absolutely critical partner. Building partnerships and recruiting landlords is an essential strategy. We could do a whole separate presentation on that topic, but really doing education and building those relationships is essential because continuum of care housing, public housing, and other affordable housing is very important, but it's limited. So connecting with landlords is an essential strategy. And finally, other partners include state housing agencies, which act a bit like a housing authority on a more macro level, and on other rental assistance and supportive housing programs, and private subsidized developments, which operate basically like mini housing authorities, but are privately owned and get assistance from HUD. So I want to finish off my portion of this presentation with 4 steps that local partnerships, criminal justice leaders can take to meet housing needs. Again, this could be a much longer conversation, but if you're looking for just a few steps of where to start, I'd like to just offer a few words here. As many of you know, people leaving prison and jail touch multiple agencies, including the homeless assistance system, other providers, other housing assistance providers, and healthcare. They tend to be what's known as familiar faces. And the problem is the resources in each of these systems are very limited. So being able to coordinate and maximize these resources is essential to have the most impact. A couple of ways that you can do that is conducting cross-systems training so that the different systems can understand both the resources that are available and the constraints in each system. For example, we helped conduct a training like this in California last year between the parole districts across the state and continuums of care. One of the best things that came out of that training was that every regional parole office knew their continuum of care contacts, and the continuum of care got a better idea of the kind of housing programs that parole agencies offered. It's also good to ensure representation from different systems and planning bodies, like a criminal justice advisory board, ensuring there's housing representation, or a local interagency council on homelessness, because this helps really advocate for the type of resources that people need in each system, because the problems go across systems and the resources are also across systems. And it's also important to include, where possible, people with lived experience in these planning bodies to really understand the human side of these perspectives and to address resource and planning concerns that otherwise might be missed. So the next of my 4 steps is assessment. And this one can be a bit of a heavier lift, but a great practice in prisons and jails is to be able to conduct a screening for homelessness or risk of homelessness and a housing needs assessment before release. And this is done, to varying degrees in varying facilities. It can be particularly difficult in jails because of lower level of staffing resources and very short stays. But they're being able to design or adapt screening and assessment tools to do this really helps focus discharge planning on people with the highest risk and help get that planning done sooner to reduce the chance of people falling through the cracks. One example of where this was done a SCA grantee, the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections implemented a process for exiting prison. They looked at housing needs as well as criminogenic risk and housing status. They integrated this into their assessment tools to really be able to do a comprehensive assessment and prioritize their discharge planning. They also utilized HUD Emergency Solutions Grant funding to pay for the case management that would be needed to connect people with housing, and also for homelessness prevention assistance, which is kind of similar to rapid rehousing, except on the front end, things that will keep people ideally from falling into homelessness. So to be able to implement these sort of steps, identifying resources for staffing support and TA is absolutely critical, whether it's via state agencies, social service partnerships, or other means. The next step is to connect with housing partners. A linkage between the homeless assistance systems, prisons and jails, and community supervision is essential to help get people connected quickly to permanent housing assistance, and again, to try to prevent people falling through the cracks in those critical first days of reentry. The most key action that can be taken is establishing the prison or the jail as an entry point into the continuum of care coordinated entry system that I mentioned earlier. And this principally involves establishing a formal referral process, as well as data entry into what's called the Homeless Management Information System. But really the foundation of being able to establish those procedures is really getting to know the folks in your local COC and building those working relationships. COCs aren't the only housing partners to connect with, but it's a very good place to start. And finally, expand. It's very important to maximize resources and connect people with the housing that's available, but in most places, there just simply isn't enough. So a few ideas for how that can be addressed: maximizing existing resources if there is local surplus state or county land. If the local PHA may have a small number of vouchers to dedicate towards a reentry population. Looking at funding outside of the housing system, such as funding from the criminal justice system for permanent housing, or cost savings through, for example, reduced jail or prison populations. Leveraging private funding is also essential because government can't do it alone, in particular to increase availability of rental assistance. And also to offer, one strategy that's been done in a few communities is to offer incentives to landlords, whether small cash incentives or even risk mitigation funds to rent towards people leaving incarceration. And then finally, as you're expanding the housing supply, it's important to keep racial equity in mind. Using data to the extent available to look at where is housing being built and who has access and similar issues.
Thanks so much, Charlie, for that great overview. Now I'm excited to be able to turn it over to the team from Clark County, Washington. We have representatives from the Sheriff's Office and the Council for Homelessness. Take it away, Clark County team.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Lookingbill. I work in Clark County Jail in Vancouver, Washington.
Good afternoon. I'm Deputy Jay Costello. I'm a corrections deputy at Clark County Sheriff's Office in Vancouver, Washington.
And hi, I'm Amanda Clark, and I am a housing coordinator team lead with Council for the Homeless in Vancouver.
And we've been asked to share a little bit with you today about how Clark County Jail is coordinating with Council for the Homeless regarding housing assessments and connecting people to services.
Our facility is located in Southwest Washington, in Vancouver, Washington. The numbers that are presented are from the year 2019 due to the fact 2020 was kind of a tough year and the numbers didn't show the accuracy of what we do here. However, in 2019, we had an average daily population of 634 inmates. Length of stay, approximately 17 to 18 days, which in the reentry world means to us, we have to get a hold of these guys that are in desperate need of services throughout the community within that time frame. so that we could attempt to fulfill their needs before they get released within that short time frame. We approximately release about 13,000 each year.
Yep, and we are considered a medium-sized jail. Interesting side note about jails, we of course have both pre-sentenced and fully sentenced persons. We have men, we have women, we have minimum, medium, maximum security, all in a corrections facility that was built in 1984 for 300 people. And not with any design or thought toward providing services, which, you know, in 1984 wasn't a thing like it is now. So our team has lots of unique logistical challenges to providing services on the ground. So the reentry program in the jail was started in 2014. It was actually started by corrections officers in the corrections branch, really recognizing that Clark County Sheriff's Office, our function, of course, is to provide public safety, right? We have law enforcement, we have supporter records, and then we operate a jail. The function of our organization was to protect and serve our community. And so it was recognized that Clark County Jail could also play a role in that mission, not only by connecting people with resources and services to decrease recidivism, but by also making sure some of the vulnerable folks that come through our jail were connected to places that could not only help them be healthier, but potentially keep them alive. The team that operates here is an interdisciplinary team. We have a sergeant, we have 4 specialized corrections officers that actually apply for and bid to be on this team. There's 2 civilian personnel, I'm one of them, I'm a social worker, and then we also take interns. The photos you can see on the screen, we run a whole variety of different services, everything from classes to drug treatment programs. We teach crisis intervention team training specific to behavioral health crisis and correctional facilities. We do a whole array of services and programs. We also work with a bucket load of people. In 2019, our team provided over 3,568 hours of direct service to inmates. We saw over 5,481 inmates, sometimes the same inmate more than once, of course, right? Because people come back for services and programs. And then we saw an additional 2,567 in our grant programs. We have a BJA grant for co-occurring disorders. That is a Second Chance Act grant. We are also a partner on a SAMHSA grant for medication-assisted treatment, a couple of local grants for peer mentoring, and a bunch of different things. My team responded to over 7,000 requests from inmates regarding, community resource information. Hey, I'm homeless, where can I live? Hey, I'm a victim of domestic violence, how do I get services? What about my food stamps? Can I get a sleeping bag? I'm gonna be releasing to the street, things like that. We run a large community meeting with over 75 community partners. The idea being we get all our providers in a room and help them talk to each other. We do not staff direct cases, but we talk about broader systems coordination. A lot of our community agencies do serve adult criminal justice involved persons, but they were pretty siloed, right? They didn't necessarily know each other because they were so busy with the work that they were already doing. What happens for the folks that we work with here is that inmates usually don't just need one thing or 2 things, they need like 15 things. So we needed our partners to be able to talk to each other to better meet some of these complex needs. We also, like I mentioned, teach that CIT for corrections training. We present all over the place, local groups, state, national, international on our programs and services. We're really, really busy. Our corrections officers actually operate the bulk of our reentry program. Deputy Costello is going to talk a little bit about the classes that we offer. And please keep in mind, of course, COVID-19 has made changes to our programs. That's a whole different training for a different day, of course, but we're doing the best we can within those limitations.
We have a few listed programs that we provide here. Anna has talked about a few of them, the co-occurring mental health and drug treatment program and classes and mentoring, as well as the medication-assisted treatment program. We also offer some job training, and most of the goals for no matter which one of these classes are presented, the main focus is a goal seeking, so that it's expressed to the inmates that, hey, there is a focus at the end of this. When I get out of here, I'll have a goal. I can get out of here and do something a little different than what I've been doing. We offered a variety of classes, food stamps. We have representatives come in, peer mentoring, recovery support meetings. All these are conducted inside our facility here. Our community partners come on a scheduled basis and present their information to a selected, qualified group of inmates. And of course, housing assessments. We primarily use Council for the Homeless, a local agency in our community. However, we do have faith-based mentoring and partnership, as well as Oxford Housing, to also assist in them type of needs.
Yep, everything we do in the reentry program is voluntary. Our target population are inmates that are either going to release to our local community, or they are pre-sentenced, but they're likely to release to our local community. That's not because we don't want to serve people that are going to prison or might have holds to other locations. It's simply because our team has limited resources. When I say voluntary, what I mean is that the court can't order us, a judge can't require us, someone's probation officer can't make somebody do something. The challenge with that is our folks don't receive any benefit to their time or their sentencing, but we're very okay allowing this piece to be independent. There's a lot of things in criminal justice that people don't have choice about or control over. Our program absolutely allows that. For example, somebody might say, you know, I want to talk about my housing, but I'm not ready to address my drug treatment. The reentry team says, great, how can we help you with that today? Really wanting to support people where they're at with the goals that they have. As you can imagine, in our jail, homelessness is a significant issue.
In 2019, approximately 13,000 persons were booked in, processed here in the Clark County. Of that number, approximately 25 to 27% report homelessness at that processing time. And keep in mind, this number may not be as accurate as it seems due to the fact that the information gathered from the individual getting booked in report housing inaccurately, or they may have trouble with the court systems, or they may give a wrong address or may not have address even though they have one. So these numbers may be skewed some, but pretty close, right around 25 to 27%. Now, in a perfect world, the reentry program gets requests from a wide range of sources, to include inmate requests. It's where the individual says, hey, I need some housing. When I get out of here in 10 days, I have no place to go. Where can I go? That's where we step in as one portion. Community partners also refer, family members refer, other inmates refer, even their attorneys refer housing needs for these individuals. So what we do is we pull a list together, determine if they qualify. If they do qualify, they're screened and they're eligible. We do a housing assessment and we collect all this paperwork, and it's sent forward, and assessments or timelines are set up so that a representative from our local Council for the Homeless can interview these individuals and prepare them for the step that's needed to once they get released from our facility. Now, that's a perfect world. However,
jail is not a perfect world, says everyone who's ever been in, worked in, or gotten near a jail. Some of the challenges that happen to us, we talk about that eligibility screening piece. Council for the Homeless worked with us to keep that as minimal as possible, and we're using HUD criteria. So if a person is incarcerated past 90 days, they are no longer considered homeless per HUD, they are now considered housed. So when we're looking for eligibility, we're checking the amount of time they've been here. We're also doing our best to check if they were homeless prior to coming to the jail. Certainly that's more of an approximation. We might look at an old booking record. We might ask the person if we can, but really we let our community partner take the weight on that. The paperwork that Deputy Costello is talking about is a packet of releases of information that was compiled by Council for the Homeless. That way, when they perform that assessment on the phone from the jail, Council for the Homeless already has some of the releases and information that they would need to help coordinate care for that person. So like we said, there's all kinds of places people fall out of our great plan. Sometimes folks trip on that 90-day incarceration rule. Certainly in our area with the impacts of COVID-19, court cases have spread out way further than they ever would. Folks are remaining incarcerated longer, not through anything that has to do with them, but simply due to delays in the courts. So that's caused a lot of problems. When people fall outside of eligibility for counsel for the homeless, we don't want to say better luck next time. We don't want to say, sorry, we can't do anything for you. We're going to do everything we can to try to help. Also note, we don't do any kind of screening based on someone's charges for whether or not they can have a housing assessment. Amanda will talk about, there are some charges that do cause more problems with HUD, specifically sex crimes, arson crimes, and things like that. Our unit does not make any determinations based on those. Simply 90 days, if possible, do we know if you were homeless or not? Let's say we've got somebody over 90 days, what happens next? Well, our team is going to do our best to refer to these other housing programs. So it could be faith-based, it could be Oxford, it could be Department of Corrections, voucher stuff that they may have access to. It could be a HARPS, we have a forensic HARPS program in this area. We're going to try to refer to anything else. Like I said, Oxfords are big. We do have some ATR funding in the state of Washington, so our peer mentoring program sometimes leverages that. We're going to try to find other options if we can. I'm going to click the next bubble for me. Bubble, thank you. We also have access to something that's traditionally used by law enforcement, but Council for the Homeless was able to make it happen so the jail can access emergency hotel vouchers. We also have a relationship with our local public health department to put someone in a cab to be able to send them to a safe location. These are used for vulnerable people. So again, think of somebody that's elderly or medically fragile. They're releasing in the middle of the night and it's December, right? Maybe they have a disability. So making sure that in that immediate emergent situation, we can get them from the jail to a safe location. Again, that's traditionally law enforcement, but are the local agency that coordinates that made it possible for our jail to be able to access that as well. We also work with homeless outreach, right? Sometimes if somebody falls outside that window of eligibility, we can't refer them for a housing assessment, but we can absolutely say to our local homeless outreach programs, hey, do you know John Smith? If we can set up a meeting with them, we try to do that as well. Hey, this is John Smith and this is how he can be reached or she can be reached. This is the kind of support they're looking for. So even if they can't have a housing assessment, someone on one of our outreach teams is aware of them, ideally has talked to them and has a plan to service engage them. We also are very fortunate here. We'll show you a picture on the next slide, so just half a second. We've been able to work again with Council for the Homeless and funnel some local donations. One grant from a nonprofit community funding group, another grant from a local church group to actually purchase tangible items for people releasing to the street. One thing to keep in mind about jail, we don't get to say, sorry, we're not going to release you until Tuesday when it's 70 degrees outside and it's daytime and it's sunny, right? Jails don't have that option. We release on Christmas Day. We release in the middle of the night. We release when it's freezing. We release 24/7 all year round. So our team was able to, through Council for the Homeless, purchase some tangible items so that if we are releasing someone to the street and it's winter, they could at least be warm. Our community partners are incredible, but they don't necessarily work at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we do. Go to the next one for me. Oh, that's not it. I'll tell you about it in a minute. Just kidding. It's Amanda's turn.
Hi, like I said earlier, my name is Amanda and I am a housing coordinator with Council for the Homeless. And just as a quick introduction, Council for the Homeless is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide community leadership, compelling advocacy, and practical solutions to prevent and end homelessness in Clark County, Washington. We are the agency designated by our local COC to serve as a coordinated entry access point for the majority of homeless assistance programs in Clark County. The benefit of coordinated entry is that it provides clients with a single point of access to multiple agencies that offer shelter and housing assistance program within a given community. It's more trauma-informed and more efficient than siloed individual entry to a multitude of different agencies. It's much easier for our clients to do this, tell their story one time and to have us connect them to all the agencies they need to rather than to tell it 20 times and relive that again and again. To find your local COC lead agency, you can either check with your state's Department of Commerce, or you can go to www.hud.gov vancouver.gov/find shelter. Not all communities have coordinated entry, and some have multiple agencies that do coordinated entry for their community. So it's just finding what your community does and then connecting with them. So our partnership with the Clark County Jail began back in 2016 when our community adopted the Housing First model, and our most chronically homeless clients were identified as also being frequent flyers at the jail. And as Anna mentioned earlier, screening for this is actually pretty simple. Clark County Sheriff's Office Reentry team screens people for 2 criteria. Were they experiencing homelessness when they were arrested? And have they been incarcerated for fewer than 90 days? Screening for housing assessment eligibility does not have to be a complex process. While higher level crimes like sex offense charges or arson charges can be more difficult to overcome, they are not impossible. A variety of funding sources in your community can provide different opportunities. So we don't exclude assessing these individuals, but we're upfront with them about how their charges are going to limit their options. Our assessments are done primarily over the phone on pre-designated days and times. And again, as Anna mentioned, if an inmate is found eligible for assessment, they're given an ROI packet to complete and sign prior to the designated day and time that week. And then the reentry team sends the packets to our agency after the inmate completes their assessment with us over the phone. Inmates are then given information sheets from Council for the Homeless regarding program eligibility, either rapid rehousing programs or permanent supported housing programs. And those are provided to the inmates post-assessment in the jail with follow-up contact information for Council for the Homeless provided for each client so that they can connect with us after released. And then the clients are added to our priority pools, which are essentially vulnerability-based wait lists used to refer clients to housing agencies as openings within their various programs become available. Council for the Homeless works with multiple agencies here in Clark County, and within each of those agencies, there's multiple programs that are funded through various sources. So there's a lot of options, and we are kind of the filtering system for that so that we can connect the clients to the programs that will best meet their needs. And just as clarification, when we talk about vulnerability literally means how likely someone is to die on the streets. In 2019, we assessed about 149 incarcerated clients. 59% of those roughly were scored into rapid rehousing programs, and 38% scored into permanent supported housing programs. So it kind of gives you an idea of how those needs and numbers shake out.
And we just wanted to note that, folks could access Council for the Homeless for housing assessments in the community. Absolutely, they provide that service. But something that inmates here at the jail pointed out to us is that, when they get out, they've got a lot going on. Everything from supervision to where's my family, to is my dog okay, to I need to get to drug treatment. So anything we could do to have a few less requirements. It also guarantees they get connected with Council for the Homeless and programs and services. A lot of these folks were people that just for whatever reason never got on the formal radar because they were never able to participate in the assessment process in the community. So doing it directly from jail helped us target people that for whatever reason just were not able to follow through in the world.
And inspired and included in that, or included in addition to that rather, we are able to come into the jail in addition to doing the phone assessments to do more intensive assessments. Housing coordinators that have received jail clearance are able to meet with inmates in the reentry pod to conduct in-person assessments with folks that have been identified as highly vulnerable, often with multiple needs for and barriers to housing. These are folks that just aren't even organized enough to even connect with us once they are released from jail. And so it provides an essential contact point for those people in our community that are really most vulnerable and just end up in jail for a variety of reasons. All right, what makes this partnership work? There are a few things, and for me, just coming in and doing this, buy-in from all partners involved. helps to remove the red tape that makes the process daunting or complicated. What I love about this team is that everybody is very committed to making this work. We were when everything started shutting down due to COVID, our assessments with Council for the Homeless for Housing were one of the last things to be dropped off of the radar. We tried to keep those going as long as possible. And it was only when the jail had to kind of restructure some stuff due to COVID that those finally had to cease for a little bit. But that was just shows the level of commitment that that our reentry team has towards making this work and getting people connected to their services.
One of the first things brought back.
And was it one of the first?
Yes.
Excellent. One of the first things brought back. And then so prioritizing that process and doing it not only consistently and regularly, but also having consistent and regular times. We have 2 days a week at a regular time every week that we try and do these assessments. Sometimes things happen and we're not able to, and that's okay. We know that can be a chaotic environment, but as much as we can, we try to make sure that we are consistent in those days and times. And prioritizing that is another thing that that actually makes this work. And then method of communication, establishing a consistent method of communication. I guess that's what I just talked about. Be flexible and find out what works best for you. Is it over the phone? Is it in person? Training jail staff on doing some of the assessments or a combination of all of the above. We've tried all of these things, and Clark County has found that doing primarily phone assessments is what works best for us. We tend to be able to serve like the maximum amount of people that way, but we're also able to come into the jail, as I mentioned earlier, for those that just isn't a good fit. It doesn't work. They need a more in-person connection to even complete these assessments. And then building relationships across agencies, get to know your team, be open and willing to find those connection points. As Anna mentioned, the CCSO hosts the quarterly reentry providers meeting that brings all the partners from all over the community together to discuss and share ways to collaborate and serve our justice-involved clients. It's an incredible meeting, and we are able to really work as a team with our other agencies in the community. Reentry has invited Council for the Homeless to participate in the annual CIT trainings to foster better understanding between two fields with very different approaches and resources. And I think that definitely helps us connect better, and then reach out and be responsive. For example, I check the local jail roster on a regular basis and alert the reentry team when someone I'm working with or I've been looking for is in custody, so that they can connect me with them for various things like assessments, signatures on paperwork, etc. And then Anna, in turn, is able to reach out when we have, they have someone in crisis that needs assistance right away, and out kind of the normal process of things.
Yep, I can't tell you how many times I've emailed Council for the Homeless and said, oh my goodness, I might have an emergency in booking. Do you have any shelter beds for a female? I'm not sure yet. I'll be updating you in 10 minutes. And they're incredibly responsive. Sometimes we need their support, sometimes we don't. But they're always really amazing about getting back to us. The middle of a crisis is not the time to make a new friend. So I'm always grateful for those relationships ahead of time. Additionally, we were able to use Council for the Homeless to accept funding on our behalf. So as a government entity, strange things happen when you give us money. So in this particular case, it was easier to funnel some community funding through Council for the Homeless. As a nonprofit organization, they have different purchasing power than we do. So if you flip to the next slide, you can see a number of tangible resources that we were able to purchase. You see everything from sleeping bags to backpacks to feminine hygiene supplies. We stock a number of items here. As I mentioned earlier, people released from the jail 24/7 in the middle of the night, when it's cold, when it's rainy, when it's snowing. You get booked in July in a tank top and you release in December, potentially wearing that same tank top. So how do we keep you warm and alive until you're able to access a service provider? Additionally, the tangible resources that we have here in Clark County Jail, our reentry officers are not the only officers that can access them. Any corrections officer in the facility can come get a sleeping bag and a tarp and give it to someone that's leaving from the jail in the middle of the night. So a lot of the photos, what you're going to see is you see a mix of civilian and uniformed personnel. We recognize that our groups provide different functions, but together we were able to achieve some of these things. To date, we've pulled in over $9,000 in flexible funding and funneled it through Council for the Homeless to support our inmate populations. $9,000 doesn't sound like much, but for some of the folks releasing, it literally might make all the difference.
As we know, there's more need than there are services and resources available always. That's always going to be a thing. For example, right now, Clark County has over 900 clients on our permanent supported housing priority pool and no current housing program openings to which we can refer them. And this is in spite of increasing our permanent supported housing bed capacity in our community over the past 2 years with additional sites and buildings specifically tailored towards folks with those needs. Though those numbers sound daunting, they don't negate or invalidate the successes that have come from this partnership. Without connection to clients throughout community access points like Reentry, many of the clients that don't otherwise access services, who only touch the system through contact with law enforcement, would not be on our radar for assistance at all. And as I mentioned earlier, recognition of this fact and willingness to take action on it is what led us to being able to connect with some of our community's most vulnerable citizens who also happen to be justice involved. Alex was one of those people. Alex was someone who didn't seek out services on her own despite experiencing homelessness for several years. She struggles with mental health, cognitive, and substance use disorders. And the only system of care that she was in regular contact with was the Clark County Jail. In the 5 years prior to 2018, Alex had been in jail 12 different times with 1 prison stay. Council for the Homeless knew her, but she was always impossible to locate when she wasn't in jail, primarily because she was in unsafe situations due to her high level of vulnerability. If it weren't for our partnership with Reentry, we would not have been able to connect her connect with her rather in 2018 when we had a housing opportunity for her. Because of our Reentry partnership, when her name came up on the jail roster, we saw that and reached out to Reentry about her. We were able to meet with Alex in the jail to update her assessment and paperwork and then refer her to a local permanent supported housing program called Lincoln Place. Her housing case managers began working with her while she was still incarcerated. And when she was released from jail this time, she was able to go directly to her own housing. It takes some time to stabilize and make that lifestyle shift. So in the first year of being housed, she was arrested 3 more times, but her last month of incarceration was in 2019. And with help from her caseworkers in her supported housing, she began to regularly attend her DOC check-ins. And as of January of this year, she's officially off paper.
That's a big deal.
It's a very big deal for her. Not all journeys end like Alex's, but her story shows that success can be and is possible, but only if we work together to break down barriers and remove the red tape.
Clark County Jail is part of a law enforcement organization. Clark County Sheriff's Office is charged with protecting and serving our community. I think what has been part of the shift that we've seen is 1, viewing Clark County Jail as a critical piece of that public safety system, but 2, really recognizing that we need to not only protect people that are outside in our community, but we need to do everything we can to protect people that perhaps are inside the walls of the jail. About a month ago, we had a client that we were all working with actually die before she was able to be placed in housing. She died on a park bench in our community because we were not able to serve her soon enough. She is not the first, she will not be the last, but certainly it drives home for me the responsibility that I have as a member of this team to do everything I can to connect people with services while they're here. Certainly we're not perfect, we're not meeting all the need, but I'm really proud that Clark County Sheriff's Office, the Reentry program in Clark County Jail, and partners like Council for the Homeless are trying, right? We're working together, we're coordinating care, and together we're accessing people that are unlikely to have been served through any other way. So we thank you for including us today. It's nice to talk with anybody, etc. Questions, I don't know. Sarah, what do you want us to do at the end?
Thank you so much. It was such a great overview. Thank you so much to Amanda Clark from Council for the Homelessness in Vancouver, Washington, Deputy Jay Costello and Anna Lookingbill from Clark County Sheriff's Office, as well as Charles Francis from the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Next slide, please. To see Reentry Week's full schedule of events and links and resources, you can visit the National Reentry Resource Center at www.thenationalreentryresourcecenter.org. Another way to join the conversation is through hashtag Reentry Matters, Reentry Week, and Reentry Week 21 on social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Sign up for the NRRC's newsletters, and if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to the NRRC via email. I want to thank again Clark County for Washington for participating in the webinar, as well as Charlie Francis. I hope everyone has a great afternoon.